Welcome everybody, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be taking a look at a relatively recent release from ScaleTrains in the Rivet counter line. This is a Tier 4 GEVO in the BNSF H1 scheme, and it is a HypoTypical paint scheme, or fantasy if you will. This run delivered at the end of October 2024, so it's been a little bit, but I figured I'd pick one up. This run delivered at the same time as the Canadian National Heritage units that I also did a review on if you're interested as well. Before we get into this review, as always, do me a favor and subscribe if you're new, or if you find yourself coming back anyways. Helps me make a couple dollars one day, so really appreciate it. Thank you in advance. Like the video as well if you enjoyed, and drop me a comment if you found this interesting or just want to chat. Always love going through those. But let's go ahead and get started. So of course you can see the box in front of you. Pretty standard ScaleTrains box here. The main difference I want to point out is we do have a black label on the back for the HypoTypical scheme. Here's a list of all of these features on this model. The box is pretty sturdy, standard ScaleTrains box. We have here our product manual, which is pretty much the same as the other ET44s. And here's a look at the function chart, just for reference. Of course, we'll take a look at them as well in the demo portion, but just for reference for you. Got some nice foam here, and then the model in the clamshell. Pretty standard packaging here. The model is pretty tight, so I'll just move it off camera real quick just to open this up. We do have roller bearing caps on this model. Drop off some of the foam here. We have soft plastic, which is stuck to the top of my model. You can pop off the truck immobilizers as well. And get rid of this handrail foam. While I'm doing so, I'll talk about the price real quick. This model was $285 directly from ScaleTrains. I picked it up at the same time as the GP40 in the Milwaukee Road scheme that I just did a review on as well. I had my eyes on it for a little bit since I love the Heritage 1 paint scheme. And then finally pulled the trigger once the GP40 is delivered in December. Here's a quick 360 for you before we go ahead and get into the details. I want to note this is an ET44C4 designation, which is what BNSF uses on their GEVOs. And that just means that only 4 of the axles are powered. So the center axle on both trucks is not powered, and that's BNSF's way of trying to save money. And I've heard that crews don't really like it because they don't have as much tractive power, having 2 less motors. All right, so let's start looking at some of the details on this model, starting up front. Going top down, as usual, we have lit number boards and nice gasketed cab windows. Inside the engineer's side, just near the frame, is the cab camera. We also have nice sand filler hatch detail and grab irons on the anti-reflective paint, as well as the wagon wheel logo on the nose just below the nose-mounted headlight, with a nice gasketed window here to the cab door as well. You will notice the walkways are sort of that pinkish color, which is a scheme that many of the true H1 locomotives wore, that being mostly Dash 9s and AC 4400s. We have ditch lights on this model that don't flash when the horn is blown, as well as the ScaleTrains metal coupler, some nice cable detail with grab irons on the plow, and silver-tipped MU hoses there as well. I move slightly over. You'll see the steps are also nicely lined and painted white on the ends. There's lots of fine printing on this model, which is almost illegible in person because it's so small, but it still looks pretty good and it gives the impression of those warning labels. Moving on now to the side of the model, the cab windows are darkened underneath the sunshades here on the side. You can see we also have that roller bearing detail. There's 4 on each side that are exposed. We move down just a little bit. You can see tons of warning labels along the model. Some of them are illegible in person. They're just so small and finely printed. Even when I put the model right next to my face, it's really hard to see. We have a little bit of a viewing window here in the side on the engine compartment doors, which all look pretty good. We also have nice separately applied metal pieces over the radiator section as well as the chain detail, which is a 2-piece plastic chain on the model. The handrail stanchions and handrails on the entire model are plastic, and they look pretty good. There's a little bit of imperfections, but pretty good in terms of how bad it could be. we move over here, you can see the handbrake wheel as well on this side of the model. Moving now to the rear, you can see we just have a rear headlight up at the top, no rear ditch lights. We have a couple of spare knuckle holders as well as the metal coupler here on the back as well. Additionally, more silver tipped MU hoses and pretty much blend into the foam here that I have the model set on. You can see the steps here on the side are perforated as well. They are etched metal pieces, which looks pretty good. Pretty standard ScaleTrains expectation at this point, as well as a couple of additional metal grab irons, and the walkway light is centered in the bottom of the green portion on the rear. Moving on now to the other side of the model, on the engineer side, you can see a little bit better that X bracing in there, which basically is the only separation there, but you can see through the entire model, so it looks pretty good, as well as a little bit of extra gray molded detail inside as well. Part of that is the truck, and part of that is extra detail that ScaleTrains has added. We have more fuel tank detail on this side as expected, and you can also see into the fans here behind these etched metal grates on the side of the model as well. Moving to the front, we have a rear view mirror on this side because of course this is the engineer side up top. The model designation, the builder's plate is illegible. It looks kind of like a smear in person. And then our walkway light is just at the end of this top step here. We'll move on now to the top of the model. You can see the modern PTC antenna array there, as well as many warning labels here, and a couple of grab irons on top. We have the horn, as well as the Tier 4 square exhaust, which is my favorite version of the Tier 4 exhaust. You can't really see anything down inside, but it is a open hole there. Additionally, here are the etched metal pieces on the radiator section. Here's a good look at that pink treaded walkway. You can see some of the handrail stanchions aren't perfectly straight on this side, and a couple of doors above the battery box on this side. And here you can see that etched metal step detail. Give you one more once over here on this side of the locomotive. Take a look at some of this truck detail as well. And we'll go ahead and check out the underside of the model next. Moving on now to the underside. Always my scariest part, putting the locomotive on its side. You can see a lot of that piping detail underneath the cab, as well as those rust-colored wheels. There's a look under the pilot there. You can see we have sanding lines. Nothing much really on the underside. Not a lot of traction motor detail, just those little bumps that make space for the gears inside the motors. And here's just a good look for you. I do want to mention one thing that I noticed on the other side of the locomotive, which I was a little confused about. Just under the cab on this side, there's what appears to be a camera. The printing above it in white is illegible, so I'm trying to do some research to figure out what that is, but I've been unsuccessful so far. So maybe it's just an added feature here on this HypoTypical, but let me know if you know what that is. That would help out. There's a look at the brake chain on this side as well. But let's go ahead and get started taking a look at the DCC and sound features on this model. Alright, welcome on over to the test track. I know it's still carpet, still working on a layout. Don't worry, it's only used for the purposes of these reviews and nothing more. Very careful with it, so I appreciate your concern and comments, no worries. Quick look here at the function chart before we get started here. Just for review, we'll take a look at these and show you what they all do. Like with most models, this locomotive is programmed to address 03 out of the box and does not turn on when the track power is turned on. So to start the locomotive, you'll press function 8, which I'll do now. I'll press F0 to turn on the directional headlight, and F6 to turn on the ditch lights, which we only have in front, but they still are directional. A note on the other lights, you see the walkway lights have turned on with function 8, as well as the number board lights, which are quite dim on this model. There are no ground lights, as the prototypical BNSF GEVOs do not have ground lights. Function 1 is our bell. And function 2 is our horn. You can hear the bell comes on and the ditch lights do not flash, as they don't on prototypical BNSF models. Function 3 is supposed to be the coupler clank, but for some reason my model came factory programmed with function 3 being the handbrake. So I'll press function 3 here and this will be the handbrake sound. And that is a predetermined length. You can't make that turn off prematurely by deselecting function 3. Function 4 are our dynamic brakes, which we'll take a look at. You can hear the air compressor kick on now, which happens when we're idling. It'll come on from time to time. F5 are the DPU lights. So if I press that here while we're in forwards, you'll see that the front lights come off and the rear lights are on. If I switch to reverse, now just the front headlights on in DPU mode. If I go ahead and switch back to forwards and turn off DPU mode, we get those front headlights back in the forward direction. F7 is our flange squeal, which we'll take a look at when we're moving. F8, of course, is our startup. F9 is the drive hold, which keeps the model at the same speed. F10 are the independent brakes, which just stops the model while it's moving. F11, though, is our radiator fan. Which is a little quiet, but ramps up just a little bit. F12 is the headlight dimmer. You can see there that the front headlight will dim and the ditch lights will turn off. Quick note, the front headlight appears just a little bit more yellow than my ditch lights, which are more of a cool blue light. F13 is our air dryer, which is just that quick noise. F14 turns off the number boards, which you can see there, they are quite dim. F15 is the isolation switch, which will just lower the prime mover sound to idle while you're moving, so it'll sound like an idle state. F16 toggles on or off the air dryer on shutdown, and 17 is the auto brake set and release. Those don't do anything here while we're idling. F18, though, is our sanding valve. That's also a predetermined length. F19 is the short air let-off, which we'll get to in just a second after the compressor. F20 is the air compressor, so I can manually turn this on. And manually turn that off. It's the same sound as you hear toggling on and off while we're idling. F21 is supposed to be the handbrake, but this is currently programmed to the coupler clank, so this is what that sounds like. Two different noises for toggling on and off. Additionally, the cab door is F22. And toggling off. F23 is our engine hood door. And that is two different settings for toggling on and off. 24 is our reverser center, which will lock your throttle controls when it's on. F25 are the cooling shutter sounds. That only has a toggle on and no toggle off. Function 26 and 27 are the manual notching up and down. So let me do that. We'll notch all the way up and come back down. And coming back down. So you can hear there's quite a bit of sort of momentum even in those sounds, where it doesn't notch up right away, it takes a little bit in between each notch. F28 controls the logic for that manual notching, and the functions I don't have on my controller are 29 being the load simulation, F30 is the automatic brake, and F31 fades out the sound. Well, let's go ahead and get this thing moving and take a look at a couple of those functions that we missed. Alright, so I've slid us back here just a little bit so you can take a look at kind of what the overhang looks like on a 22-inch curve. But let's go ahead and get this thing moving here. We'll come to 1 speed step forwards. We are just the tiniest bit of jitter here. Here's speed step 2. Just a tiny bit of jitter. And here's speed step 3, and we're buttery smooth at this point. We'll come up here to speed step 8 and then 10, just to throttle up a little bit. Let's go ahead and toggle function 4 for the dynamic brakes. And the flame squeal here. So you can hear it takes a little bit for those dynamic brakes to kick in, but once they do, they're pretty loud, and it also cuts the motor out of notching, so it actually simulates as if it is dynamic braking. Let's show you what function 5, the DPU mode, also entails here on the rear of the model. So I turn that on. Now we are still in the forward direction, but that rear headlight is on. I toggle that off and just switch us back into reverse. We'll go ahead and come backwards in speed step 1. Still a little jitter. Still got the dynamic brakes on here. We'll go ahead and turn those off. Come to speed step 10. Very smooth driving after we get past speed step 3 in both cases. And bring it back down. The model has much more momentum when moving in the direction of travel than braking or slowing down. That happens a lot more quickly. Do want to show you here, the model also does have capacitors installed, so we do have the model running. Let me go ahead and shut it down so you can hear that sequence, and then we'll test the capacitors. There's our shutdown complete. Let's go ahead and remove it from the track and show you how long those capacitors last. There you go, a couple nice seconds for you. Let's go ahead and also give you a quick run by. All right, I hope you enjoyed that look at the DCC and sound features of the LokSoundv5 decoder in this locomotive. A couple things to note. While all the wheels were engaged according to my wheel gauge, the couplers on both ends were just a little bit low. Additionally, although we already discussed the programming switch with functions 3 and 21 reversed on my locomotive, when I first put it on the track just to test it out, as I always do before making a review, the engineer side ditch light on the left did not come on no matter what function I pressed, which was a little odd because, of course, the BNSF has stationary ditch lights that don't flash, so I didn't think it could be something related to that. I popped off the shell and emailed ScaleTrains support about it, just to see if there's anything I could do, and I couldn't get it to work. However, I had packed the model, about to send it in, and I had a second thought, maybe I should test it out, and I just put the model back on the track, popped the shell off, and put it back on, and then the ditch light started working again. The conductor's side was perfectly fine on the right, so I'm not sure what that issue was, but just a heads up. I'm not sure exactly how I resolved it. Just made sure the shell was on secure, which I thought it was before, but now we're all in cosmetic good order. And speaking of cosmetics, although there's a ton of warning labels and other decals on this locomotive, some of them are a little tough to read. A little more than usual on a ScaleTrains locomotive, so I'm not sure if it's just because it's a HypoTypical paint scheme. Maybe they scaled it just a little bit smaller than a real locomotive. It still looks good from farther away, just if you want to get up close, it's a little bit tougher to read more of the labels on this model. Additionally, this model comes in at the new price for GEVOs of $285. The other GEVOs that were delivered in this same run, those being the Canadian National Heritage units, were only $260. So just a little bit more expensive on this model. And if I'm being honest, I really picked it up because of the paint scheme. I love the BNSF H1 scheme. It's my favorite one. And there weren't any Dash 9s I could find available, so I picked this up in the meantime. I might eventually sell it if I get a couple pairs of Dash 9s in the H1 scheme, which ScaleTrains has done before. Same with athearn, but we'll see. I really like it for now. It'll stay around. You might see it in the background of other videos coming up. Overall, I think the model's pretty solid. No issues with speaker crackling, and the drive smooths out after speed step 3, which you can take a look at in the speed tables as well and adjust from there. Paint looks really good across the entire model, except for just the decals just being a little bit too small in some cases. Other than that, I definitely recommend it. There still may be some HypoTypical schemes in stock with your dealers. I know they don't typically sell as well as the more prototypical schemes from ScaleTrains, since they're more well known for doing those. I picked this up in December, and there were still some others available in this BNSF scheme that I checked today. Definitely take a look, consider it if you're interested. With that, I'll go ahead and wrap up this video for today. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, do me a favor and subscribe if you made it this far. Really appreciate it, so thank you very much. Like the video if you enjoyed, and drop me a comment here if you just want to chat or you got something to point out in this model. Help me out with what is under the conductor's side just up front here. I'm trying to look that up still, but no luck. With that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks for watching.